You're watching PIX on Politics Daily with Dan Mannarino.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. I'm Dan Mannarino. Welcome to PIX on Politics Daily. It is February 2nd, and hopefully everybody had a fantastic weekend. I know it's still bitterly cold out there, and right now, just kind of like in the political headlines, Mayor Mamdani is facing some flack right now for the number of deaths. We're up to 14 deaths, these cold weather-related deaths, and many saying that he should maybe go ahead and take down some of these homeless encampments that he said he would not touch. Queensborough President Donovan Richards, actually, who is very supportive of Mayor Mamdani, broke with him this weekend saying it's time to get some of these folks inside. So it's going to be interesting. Our Henry Rossoff is going to be on that this week, following up with the mayor and what he's doing for some of these cold weather-related deaths. And some of the people who are just complaining now that while the day of the storm, he may have done a good job, the city just doesn't look like it's being handled in terms of trash pickup and snow removal, so on and so forth. So we're paying close attention to that, hearing you as well. I know we did the letter grades with you last week, and a lot of you said D or F in terms of how we handled the storm. So continue to sound off. I want to hear from you. In the meantime, as we are doing a lot on this show, we are talking to various congressional members, midterms, right? Big year. And we have a lot of the candidates who are running close races that we're following very carefully, NY-10, 11, 12, 17 in particular. And so let's zero in on NY-17. We've had a number of the candidates on so far, but I wanted to go to the person who's defending the seat, trying to hold on to it, and that is Congressman Mike Lawler, who is joining me now. So Congressman, great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Danny.
So let me begin first and foremost, while we have you here, before we're going to get into the re-election run and midterms and where you see things stand. I mean, last night you had this big town hall. It was in the New York Times this morning, writing about it, that it kind of got rowdy and raucous. No surprise that some of these town halls, not only in your district, but around the country, kind of get loud, right? What was it that people were getting loud about?
Look, this is the 13th town hall that I've held in my district. I'll do 3 more this year. And I believe this is an important part of democracy. You have to be willing to stand there and answer questions and articulate the decisions that you've made. And so obviously, since President Trump has come back to office, these town halls have gotten a little rowdier than in my first term. Frankly, a lot of these people aren't interested in hearing the answer. They just want to yell and scream. And so, within reason, we let that happen. But my intention is to actually engage in a constructive dialogue. And, to a lot of the questions that they ask, I actually answer it in a way that they would support, but they don't want to hear the answer. Mm-hmm. And that's fundamentally part of the problem in our politics today. People really aren't interested in constructive dialogue. They just want to get into their partisan corners and scream and be gratified by somebody reaffirming their opinion as opposed to actually figuring out how do we solve some of the major challenges facing our country.
Congressman, a lot of the dialogue last night that you faced and a lot of the dialogue in recent weeks has been around ICE, their operations around the country. That seemed to be some of the frustration that people were experiencing last night. So let me ask you, ICE as it currently stands, I read your op-ed in the New York Times. How do you think ICE is handling some of these raids, some of these removals right now?
Look, where you see cooperation with ICE in states and cities, you don't have these, interactions. You don't have these altercations because you have local law enforcement cooperating and providing crowd control if necessary. In Minneapolis, part of the problem here was that local law enforcement was prohibited from cooperating. And so they were not providing any crowd control whatsoever. And in fact, the St. Paul PBA president said that this was a major problem and something that could have avoided any deaths whatsoever if local law enforcement were permitted to cooperate. So to me, there's a few things that need to happen here. Number one, there needs to be a complete and thorough investigation into what happened to Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Both situations are tragic. I believe they were preventable, but we need to get to the bottom of it in terms of exactly what happened, and it needs to be federal, state, and local law enforcement working together. Secondarily, I've said some of ICE tactics need to change. They should not be wearing masks. Simultaneously, the doxing is a major problem, and we need the cooperation of local law enforcement and elected officials to stop that. People should not be doxing ICE agents and their families and exposing them to threats or harm. Third, you need to actually have cooperation between state, local, and federal law enforcement. Sanctuary city policies need to come to an end. In my home county of Rockland, one of my opponents, Beth Davidson, is trying to make Rockland a sanctuary county.
Yep.
I will stop that. It is not going to happen on my watch, and I will make sure that the votes are there to kill it, because it is a disastrous policy, and it will make Rockland County and the Hudson Valley less safe. Westchester already has this policy, and some of my Democratic colleagues will say, no, they're allowed to cooperate, with federal law enforcement on crimes. No, only on federal crimes and only with a federal judicial warrant.
Okay.
When state crimes are involved, they are not permitted to cooperate with ICE, and that is a major problem.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, very loud and clear, right? And if I may just push back a little bit on some of the things that the Minneapolis police chief said to the New York Times. He was saying that he, in its entirety, looking at it, didn't think that some of these agents were effectively trained enough to do what they were going in and doing. And so the conversation is becoming, for folks who are looking for a pathway to citizenship, right, who may have crossed the border illegally but have no criminal background, who aren't deemed the worst of the worst, should they be afforded the right to a path to citizenship? Because when President Trump began all of this, it was, we're going after the worst of the worst.
Yeah, so just to clarify, I was talking about the PBA president.
Gotcha.
The police chief obviously had other thoughts, but he's also dealing with the mayor of Minneapolis, and they have been prohibited from cooperating. And that is a major problem. As I said in the New York Times, I think we need immigration reform. This is something I've been championing for years. I've been a co-lead on the Dignity Act. If somebody has been here 5, 10, 15, 20 years, their children and grandchildren may be American citizens, they've been participating in the workforce, we need to have a legal path forward. That does not mean citizenship. I think you can preclude that. But I do think there needs to be a legal path forward so that we can bring them out of the shadows. The fact is, you're not rounding up and deporting 25 million people who are in this country undocumented. And so you have to deal with this realistically. We do need to crack down on the criminals, which is part of the reason why local law enforcement needs to be permitted to cooperate. You wouldn't have needed a surge in Minneapolis if local law enforcement was participating with ICE. You wouldn't have needed 3,000 ICE agents coming into Minneapolis to round up hundreds of criminals in a surge operation. So there's a way to deal with this constructively.
What do you say? Sorry, Congressman. What do you say to the ones who are not criminals that are getting rounded up in these?
Look, again, I think you have two situations here. Number one, under Joe Biden, you had 10.5 million people come into the country, most of them illegally. The Biden administration abused the asylum and parole process, pretty much just throwing everybody into that system. 70% of those cases are rejected when they're actually adjudicated. So you have people that came in within the last 3+ years that may not have committed a crime, but they shouldn't be here. And so that is part of the operation to deport people. The people that I'm talking about are the people that have been in this country for more than 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, that have been working in our communities, have been part of our economy, whose children and grandchildren are American citizens, in fact. And so we don't want to break that up. We don't want to hurt these families. We want to have a legal pathway forward. And we want to fix the legal immigration system moving forward. One of the things that the president has done quite effectively is secure the border. We have had 9 straight months of net zero illegal immigration into the country. That is a positive step. That is something the American people demanded, and the president has delivered on. But we have to fix the immigration system as a whole.
Congressman, right now we're in the midst of a partial government shutdown. A lot of the back and forth is really over Department of Homeland Security funding. I know it came to a vote. It's going to come to a vote again. How are you voting? Should Department of Homeland Security be funded?
Yes, I will continue to vote, as I always have, to keep the government open and funded. The fact is ICE is funded through 2029. So this effort by Democrats to shut the government down over the Department of Homeland Security is not actually impacting ICE funding. What it is doing is it's impacting TSA, it's impacting the Coast Guard, it's impacting FEMA. We just had brutal winter storms across the country. People rely on FEMA. So we need to get the government fully open and funded. And that is my commitment. We can and should negotiate over reforms to our immigration system and to the way enforcement is done. For instance, I've said they should not be wearing masks. I have no problem with body cameras. Frankly, I think that ends up helping law enforcement in these cases oftentimes. So that's not an issue to me. But the fact is there's going to be a negotiation, but you don't do it by shutting the government down.
I want to talk about your race in particular. I don't know if you saw, but it went from leaning Republican to toss-up, right? And so I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are on that, on your seat kind of moving over into the toss-up category. It's not necessarily that people are unhappy with you, but maybe they're unhappy with President Trump.
Well, look, I think these prognosticators and rankings really don't matter. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to the voters. And I feel confident about the work that I have done in my district to earn another term. I fought for and lifted the cap on salt, the single largest tax cut in the entire bill. The average New Yorker is going to see a $4,000 tax cut when they go to file their taxes this year. And lifting the cap on salt was critical to that, especially in a district like mine. We have secured the border. We have made our community safer. The murder rate is down 21%. And frankly, a lot of that is attributable to the work that has been done to crack down on criminal illegal aliens in our country. You look at foreign policy. I'm the chair of the Middle East and North Africa Subcommittee. I represent one of the largest Jewish communities in the country in my congressional district. We have not only brokered a ceasefire, but we have gotten all of the hostages returned home. And we have taken out Iran's nuclear capabilities. So when you look at what we have done and the work that I've been focused on, whether it be housing, healthcare, energy, I just brought back roughly $1.2 billion to New York State by getting the MCO tax, the Managed Care Organization tax, extended from March 31st to December 31st, which is a huge win for New York. It'll bolster our healthcare system. You look at things like housing, interest rates are coming down, which brings down the cost of a mortgage. You look at energy prices for the first time in 5 years, gasoline is below $3. You look at what we're doing to increase domestic production, permitting reform is critical. So I'm focused on a litany of issues that matter to my district. And delivering on them. So I'm less worried about what the political prognosticators say and more focused on what my job is and executing on that.
Before I get to redistricting, I want to ask you one more question about affordability, because you just kind of listed everything, right, that you say has been done. But if you talk to some folks, they say they don't feel it. So yeah, on paper, it looks like a lot has been done. Sure, interest rates are coming down, right? But then somebody heads to the grocery store and they're paying this obscene amount for groceries, or their energy bill just came in and they're paying hundreds of dollars in energy costs. So how do you kind of convince someone that enough is being done for the day-to-day costs?
Look, I think we went through a period of record inflation. It caused prices to skyrocket all across the country, but especially in a state like New York, where Democrats control everything. You know, Zohran Mamdani talked about affordability, but the fact is Democrats have had control of New York City and New York State for over a decade. And the cost of living has skyrocketed. So I have been
Republicans have the House, the
focused.
Senate, and the White House right now.
Right. And we're actually fixing the problem at a federal level, which is why we passed the single largest tax cut in American history. And so when people go to file their taxes this year, they are going to see the return. They are going to get more money back in their pockets to be able to afford the cost of living. But more needs to be done when it comes to energy. We need to increase domestic production of energy. You know, New York State, we need nuclear. We need natural gas. The all-electric mandate is foolish. That is what is driving utility costs in New York State. While the rest of the country's utility rates are dropping, New York's is rising. That's not Washington. That's Albany and New York City. That needs to change. Healthcare. I have been fighting to reform our healthcare system. I signed on to extend the ACA enhanced premium tax credit. We forced a vote through the House, got that passed. But the Senate needs to come back with a bipartisan compromise, which is what I've been working towards to address that while also fixing the larger healthcare issues, including the fact that you need to go after the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical industry. The president is right to focus on most favored nation and making sure that Americans are not subsidizing Europeans' prescription drug costs. So there's a lot that we're working on. And then housing. You know, I sit on the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee. We're 8 million units underbuilt nationwide. We are working to get a bipartisan housing plan passed through Congress that will cut regulations, that will increase supply, that will help Americans be able to have access to capital to afford to buy a home or rent, which is a major problem, in addition to the critical programs like Section 8 vouchers that help Americans be able to afford to live in a home. Housing is one of the most important issues when we're talking about affordability, and that's why I'm focused on energy, healthcare, and housing. These are the issues that are going to bring down costs. Grocery prices are down. They're not exactly where we want them to be, but they are down significantly from the height of the Biden administration's inflationary policies.
Yeah, I'm up against the clock here, and I do want to get to redistricting, but I want to ask you one question about healthcare because you said it's one of your top three. So what do you say to folks right now who are like, well, I'm paying more now. My premiums are going to go up because of the vote.
Yeah. No, it's not because of the vote. Let's be clear. Everybody wants to conflate a lot of things. Obamacare has been in effect for 15 years. Since Obamacare took effect, healthcare premiums have skyrocketed 96%. So Obamacare didn't do what they said it would do in terms of reducing costs. And part of that is the economies of scale that were promised have not come to fruition. There's been major consolidation across our healthcare system, and it is not actually brought down cost. So you have to break up the monopolies. The insurance companies are a major problem. United Healthcare should not be owning providers. You know, Aetna should not be owning PBMs. We have to tackle this. We need PBM reform. We need HSA expansion. We need to actually go after the pharmaceutical industry in terms of the cost. So there's a lot to do. That's what I'm focused on. Things like associated health plans, which will actually allow small business owners to pool together and purchase healthcare at a cheaper rate. CBO scored that, said it would bring down costs by 11%.
If you're saying that, if you're saying it didn't conflate, if you're saying not to conflate them, right? Can you explain why somebody's premium is going up?
Again, it is directly tied to the healthcare system that we have. Obamacare is the law of the land. This is what Democrats said was going to bring down healthcare costs. And yet across the country, healthcare premiums have skyrocketed. I want to fix it. It's not enough to just say Obamacare bad. I want to fix it and say, how do we actually reform the system? Now, with respect to the vote that you referenced with respect to Medicaid, we are reforming a system that is fundamentally broken. Medicaid costs have doubled in 5 years. Okay, you look at New York State, the CDPAP program, Governor Hochul, it was a $10 million program that became an $11 billion program. Governor Hochul says it needs to be reformed. Why? Because it's unsustainable and there's waste, fraud, and abuse in the system. That's what we did. We went after the waste, the fraud, and the abuse. We said, if you are not eligible, you should not be collecting Medicaid benefits. If you're not a citizen, you should not be collecting Medicaid benefits. If you're an able-bodied adult without dependent children, you should get a job to collect those benefits. The vast majority of the American people agree with those common sense reforms. Democrats will say, oh, they cut $1 trillion and gave tax cuts to billionaires. That's just not true. The $1 trillion is over 10 years. And even with those reforms, Medicaid is going to grow by 25% over the next decade. So what we did was bend the curve of growth. We did not cut it. We bent the curve by rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse in the system. I have fought for New York to make sure that New York has the support and resources that it needs. But I'll just tell you, Dan, New York has the most expansive Medicaid system in the country, bar none. They allow illegal immigrants to collect Medicaid benefits. That's got to stop. That's got to stop. And New York needs to get its fiscal house in order. They're projected to have a $36 billion deficit. That is their own making.
I'm up against the clock. I've been saying it, and I'm going long with you. I hope you don't mind. But let me ask you about redistricting, because it is a bit of contention in this race in particular. You have some of your opponents on their side, Ms. Conley, saying that you've been silent on this issue regarding whether or not lines should be redrawn. I know Republicans are not happy that the judge is looking at New York 11 saying, okay, we're going to redraw the lines. What is your take on redrawing mid-cycle?
Well, Kate Conley lied to your face when she said that I was silent. I've been one of the most vocal people against partisan gerrymandering and mid-decade redistricting. When Texas advanced legislation to do that, I was on every network saying I'm opposed to that, and it's wrong. I was against California doing it. I was against North Carolina and Ohio and Missouri doing it. But I'm equally against New York doing it. And remember, Dan, New York did it last term, last election. New York was the one that started mid-decade redistricting. Hakeem Jeffries had somebody file a lawsuit, and they stacked the Court of Appeals to get a favorable ruling so that they could redraw New York's maps, and they picked up 4 seats as a result. The fact is, this is now New York's 3rd attempt at partisan gerrymandering. I'm against it. I've introduced legislation in Congress to ban gerrymandering and partisan redistricting nationwide, and to ban mid-decade redistricting. It shouldn't happen. Politicians should not be choosing their voters. The voters should make the decision, and everybody should be consistent in this. So if Kate Conley is against what Texas did, she should equally be against what New York did, but that's not what she said. She said she's in favor of what New York is trying to do in the interview with you, because, we got to fight fire with fire, but that's not the way to fix the system. You have to be consistent in your opposition, and I have been.
Yeah, to be clear, and Democrats, to your point, yes, have said, many of them have said, we got to fight fire with fire. Since Texas did it, we're going to do it in California, we're going to do it in New York. Is there a time?
But they did it in New York first. That's the part they all forget.
Are you saying that it's okay to do it, once the census results come out and may show that, populations have shifted or whatever it may be, just not mid census?
It should be once a decade after the census.
Yeah.
And again, it should be independent redistricting. It should not be partisan gerrymandering. Districts should be whole and contiguous, and communities of interest should be kept together. Look, Staten Island and Manhattan are not communities of interest. And I don't know how anybody could say that with a straight face. Staten Island and Brooklyn have been together for years. Obviously, you have the Verrazano Bridge. The ferry is not a legal means to get from Staten Island to Lower Manhattan. So this whole episode is nothing more than Democrats' attempt to try and steal a seat by making it more partisan Democrat.
All right, we're going to leave it there. I know we covered a lot of ground here. Congressman Mike Lawler, great to have you. Good to see you. And come on back soon, okay?
Thanks, Dan.
All right. Okay, everybody, and continue to sound off. I want to hear from you. And we're working on Friday's show, the big show, Friday night. Looks like we may be having the first ever convicted person who is now running the Department of Corrections as the commissioner as our guest, Stanley Richards, who ran the Fortune Society as well. So he's going to be my guest on Friday. But in the meantime, have a great day. I'll see you back here tomorrow.